Rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the desolate highway into an impressionistic smear of gray. John gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles white. Quick business trip to the sleepy town of Hollow Creek turned into a nightmare thanks to a sudden downpour and a missed turn. His phone was dead and the GPS had gone haywire. Now, lost and utterly alone, John squinted through the relentless deluge searching for any sign of civilization. Flicker of headlights in the distance jolted him awake. Relief flooded his system as he steered towards the light, praying for a gas station or a diner with a phone. The approaching vehicle turned out to be a rusty pickup truck. Its driver, a gruff-looking man with a bushy beard. "Lost, are you?" the man boomed, leaning out the window. John explained his predicament, the man nodding curtly. "Head straight," he rasped, his voice gravelly. "You'll find the town just past the bridge." The bridge loomed ahead, a skeletal silhouette etched against the angry sky. It was a monstrous iron structure, its long, slender frame vanishing into the storm's fury. The wind howled, carrying a chilling moan that seemed to come from the very steel itself. John hesitated. It looked treacherous, its silhouette swallowed whole by the tempest. But the prospect of spending a night on the deserted highway was worse. Taking a deep breath, he pressed on. Closer he got, the more monstrous the bridge appeared. The wind tore at the car, buffeting it mercilessly. Headlights barely pierced the swirling rain, leaving John navigating by instinct. As he approached the middle of the bridge, the car's engine sputtered and died. Panic clawed at his throat. He was stranded, trapped in this metal tomb amidst the raging storm. Fumbling for his phone, John realized with a jolt that it had switched off on its own. A sense of dread coiled around him. He glanced at the rearview mirror, feeling a prickle of unease. The bridge was far darker than expected. The wind had sculpted the rain into a thick curtain, obscuring everything beyond the immediate vicinity of the headlight. A sudden thump on the roof of the car made him jump. He whipped his head around. Nothing. Just the relentless drumming of rain. Then, another thump, louder this time, accompanied by a metallic scrape. John's heart hammered against his ribs. He strained to hear above the wind, but the only sound was the storm's symphony of terror. He fumbled for his flashlight, its beam a fragile beacon in the darkness. Stepping out carefully, John scanned the roof of the car. There were no dents, no scratches, just a thin layer of rainwater. But the unease lingered. Returning to the driver's seat, John noticed a faint mist swirling around the passenger side. He blinked, attributing it to the rain and the chill that had crept in. The mist grew denser, taking on a grotesque form, a shadowy figure, hunched and menacing. John's breath hitched. The figure solidified, coalescing from the mist. It was a man, or what used to be a man. His clothes were tattered, his flesh a sickly gray, his eyes burning with an unnatural yellow light. A scream ripped from John's throat, primal shriek of terror. The figure lurched towards him, its skeletal hand reaching out. John slammed his foot on the gas pedal, a desperate prayer forming on his lips. Car coughed, sputtered, then lurched forward. He didn't look back. He drove through the pouring rain, the bridge receding behind him. Only when he reached the first flickering lights of Hollow Creek did John allow himself to breathe. Safe in the warmth of a small diner, John recounted his experience to the friendly waitress, Sarah. Her smile vanished, replaced by a grimace. "Crow's Creek Bridge," she whispered, her voice low. "It's haunted, you know." John stared at her, his fear solidifying into a chilling realization. Sarah explained the legend. Decades ago, a man named William Crawley, a notorious criminal, was cornered by the police on the bridge. He chose to take his own life, leaping into the raging river below. The townsfolk believed his restless spirit haunted the bridge, seeking revenge. "People have seen things," Sarah continued, her voice hushed. "Strange figures, disembodied voices, cars malfunctioning. Some say it's William, forever trapped on that bridge." Horror coiled in John's stomach. Car stalling, the mist, chilling figure, it all fit. He spent the night restlessly tossing in his motel bed. The image of the ghastly figure burned into his mind. The next morning, John decided to leave Hollow Creek, eager to put the bridge and its chilling ghost behind. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As he drove out of town, the rain had cleared, leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening. The world seemed different somehow, sharper, more alive. Yet a knot of unease tightened in John's gut. Couldn't shake the feeling he was being watched. He reached the bridge, and his heart hammered against his ribs. It looked less menacing in the bright sunlight, skeletal structure stark against the blue sky. Yet a sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air. Hesitantly, John gripped the steering wheel, debating whether to take a detour. Time was tight, and the alternate route would add a significant delay. Suddenly, a black crow cawed harshly, landing on the bridge's railing right in his line of sight. Cocked its head, its obsidian eyes glinting with an unsettling intelligence. John slammed on the brakes, car screeching to a halt inches from the bird. It stared at him for a long, unnerving moment, then took flight, circling the bridge 3 times before disappearing into the distance. John took a deep breath, trying to dismiss the crow as a mere coincidence. But the encounter had reignited the terror from the previous night. He closed his eyes for a moment, willing himself to be rational. Stepping out of the car, he decided to walk across the bridge. Maybe facing his fear head-on was the only way to get past it. As his foot touched the rusted metal of the bridge, an old gust of wind whipped around him, carrying a faint, guttural whisper. The hairs on his neck prickled. He looked up, scanning the empty road ahead, saw nothing. The feeling of being watched intensified. Halfway across the bridge, the wind picked up, owling with a new ferocity. The once vibrant sunlight seemed to dim, replaced by an eerie twilight. John stumbled forward, his grip tightening on the metal railing for support. The wind carried whispers again, this time distinct, chilling words repeated over and over.
Turn back. Leave this place.
Panic clawed at John's throat, quickened his pace, his head down against the raging wind. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the air. It wasn't human, but a horrifying, inhuman screech that ripped through him like a physical blow. He stumbled, his hands slipping off the railing. John went crashing to the ground, landing hard on the rough asphalt. He looked up, his heart pounding in his chest. There, on the opposite end of the bridge, stood the horrifying figure from his car. The spectral William Crowley, his eyes burning with malevolent yellow light, and a chilling smile twisting his skeletal face. John scrambled to his feet, his legs shaky, terror paralyzing him. He wanted to scream, to run, but his body wouldn't cooperate. Figure on the other end of the bridge took a step forward, then another, closing the distance with an unnatural swiftness. Just then, a loud rumble shook the bridge. John looked down to see a massive tow truck approaching from the opposite direction. It screeched to a halt a few feet from William's spectral form. The tow truck driver, a gruff, elderly man, stepped out, eyes widening at the sight before him.
"What the?"
he muttered, then cleared his throat.
"All right there? Need a tow?"
The sudden intrusion seemed to break the spell. William turned, his eyes blazing with fury for a moment. Then, with a final ear-splitting shriek, he dissolved into a swirling mist that dissipated into the air. The light returned, the wind died down, and the bridge returned to its normal state. John, his body trembling uncontrollably, could only stare as the tow truck driver approached him.
"Car trouble?"
The driver asked kindly, offering John a hand up. John nodded, speechless. As he climbed into the tow truck, couldn't help but glance back at the bridge. It looked ordinary now, but the memory of the encounter chilled him to the bone. John would never forget the bridge, the spectral figure, and the terrifying confirmation of the legend of Crow's Creek Bridge. News of John's encounter with the spirit spread like wildfire through Hollow Creek. Townspeople weren't surprised. The bridge, it seemed, would forever be a conduit for the restless spirit of William Crawley, a chilling reminder for anyone who dared to cross it. John thought the worst was over. Safe in the tow truck, he watched the bridge recede in the distance. Relief washed over him, a warm wave dispelling the icy terror. But as they reached the far side of the bridge, the scenery outside the window began to change. The vibrant greens and blues of the landscape morphed into a sickly, greenish-yellow hue. The air grew thick and oppressive, The tow truck driver, who had been humming a cheerful tune moments ago, suddenly fell silent. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. John cleared his throat, his voice raspy. "Is everything all right?" The driver didn't answer. He kept his gaze fixed on the road ahead, his brow furrowed. Then, with a shaky voice, he muttered,
"I don't remember this part of the route."
John's heart hammered against his ribs. Craned his neck, peering out the window. The road stretched endlessly before them, devoid of any signs of life. The once vibrant landscape had been replaced by a barren wasteland, dotted with skeletal trees, their branches reaching out like gnarled claws. The tow truck slowed down, its engine groaning in protest. John noticed a flicker of movement in the distance, a shadowy figure flitting between the trees. It was William Crowley, or some grotesque parody of him. This time, his form was even more horrifying. His skeletal body stretched and contorted, limbs at unnatural angles, his face a grotesque mask of rage and despair. John opened his mouth to scream, but no sound came out. He was frozen in terror, his eyes glued to the approaching figure. William Crowley stopped a few meters from the tow truck, his eyes burning into John's soul. Then, with a voice that sounded like nails scraping on a chalkboard, he spoke.
You shouldn't have crossed the bridge,
he rasped, his voice a chilling chorus of whispers and moans. John wanted to plead for mercy, beg for his life, but his voice remained trapped in his throat. William Crowley reached out a skeletal hand, its long, jagged fingers brushing against the windshield. The glass crackled with an unnatural white light. John felt an icy tendril of dread slither down his spine. Suddenly, the tow truck lurched forward, the driver slamming on the brakes. The vehicle screeched to a halt, inches from a deep gaping chasm that had opened up in the road ahead. The ground beneath them crumbled, rocks and debris tumbling into the abyss. John looked at the driver, his eyes wide with terror. The old man's face had aged dramatically, his skin wrinkled and papery, his eyes filled with a profound sadness.
This is where it ends.
The driver rasped, his voice weak and raspy.
He feeds on fear. Don't give him the satisfaction.
John understood. This wasn't a simple tow truck driver. He was another victim of Crowley's malevolence, trapped in an endless cycle of torment. Closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He wouldn't scream, wouldn't succumb to terror. He would fight it with every ounce of his being. Opening his eyes, John met William Crowley's gaze head-on. The spectral figure seemed surprised, the flicker of a smirk replaced by a flicker of confusion. John's voice, though shaky, emerged. "I'm not afraid anymore," he rasped. "You may have taken this bridge, but you won't take me." John's defiance seemed to catch William Crowley off guard. The spectral form shimmered, the unnatural glow in its eyes dimming slightly. It took a step back, the chasm behind the tow truck seeming to grow wider.
this isn't over.
William Crowley rasped, his voice losing its power.
You'll regret defying me.
The figure retreated further, dissolving into the sickly yellow mist that now filled the air. John watched it go, his body still trembling, but his heart filled with a newfound resolve. The tow truck driver slumped in his seat, the decades of terror etched on his face seeming to ease slightly.
You did good, son.
He rasped, a hint of gratitude in his voice. John nodded, speechless. As the mist dissipated, the oppressive air lifted, the sickly yellow hue fading back to a normal, albeit gloomy, twilight sky. Desolate landscape returned to its familiar green and blue, the skeletal trees replaced by familiar vegetation. The tow truck driver pulled the vehicle away from the edge of the chasm, which had thankfully closed up as abruptly as it appeared. John watched in disbelief as the road ahead reappeared, the familiar route back to Hollow Creek unfolding before them. The drive back was uneventful, the tow truck driver falling silent once more. John remained shaken, but a strange sense of calm settled over him. Reaching Hollow Creek, the driver dropped John off at his motel. John thanked him profusely, offering a wad of cash that the driver politely refused.
Just glad you made it out alive, son,
he muttered, driving away before John could protest. John settled back into his room. The events of the bridge were playing in his mind. The terrifying encounter, the chilling apparition, the otherworldly shift in reality. It was enough to shatter anyone's sanity. Yet, amidst the terror, there was an ember of defiance, a newfound respect, power of his own will. He knew the bridge would continue to claim victims, its darkness fed by fear. John vowed that wouldn't be his fate. He would carry the memory of the encounter, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces that lurked in the world. He wouldn't let it consume him. He would leave Hollow Creek, but he wouldn't forget. He would share his story, a testament to the power of courage in the face of darkness, a beacon of hope for those unfortunate enough to cross Crow's Creek Bridge.